Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of The Best We Could Do by Thi Bui. This is a graphic work that is a mixture of memoir of Bui's experiences, as well as an oral history of her parents' experiences being refugees from Vietnam in the 1970s. I think that this book does such an amazing job of mixing her experiences as an immigrant growing up in the United States with these oral histories of her parents' experiences growing up in Vietnam, and really taking a look at how that political unrest in Vietnam and the experience of being refugees formed her parents and led to some generational trauma that was passed down to her. Bui especially seems to be using this book as a way to process that generational trauma and heal, understanding where her parents came from, letting go of the resentment and anger and hurt that she had growing up, in order to, as she becomes a mother herself, not pass that generational trauma down onto her son. I think that this book does such a great job of mixing in so many different aspects of the refugee experience to understand and have compassion and empathy for that in order to kind of move forward into a brighter future. It was absolutely beautiful, so moving, and I just really wanted to share how special this book was and how many things about it I thought were done just so very, very well. So now let me go into some of the aspects that I thought were done so well in this book, starting with the format. I think that the graphic novel format was such a good choice for this because it really brings the reader into the experiences in such a visual way, which can be very helpful in building context for things that readers may not be familiar with. So in this memoir, it's a combination of Bui's experiences as an immigrant in the 70s, as well as an oral history of her parents from the 50s, 60s, 70s when they were growing up in Vietnam. And I think that the visual representation of Vietnam in this was such a powerful tool because it gave a lot of understanding to the reader without having to spell it out all of the details. Even things like just having maps of Vietnam or having images showing rural aspects of Vietnam versus the city aspects. So much of that really built an understanding of the context beyond what simple words would do without feeling kind of info dumpy. So I think that that choice was really strong and helped build a lot of understanding in the reader for what was going on. Next, I think that Bui did a really amazing job in this book of exploring the tension that children in immigrant families face between adapting to the new society that they're surrounded by while also dealing with a very different home life. And for Bui, this was exacerbated by the experiences that her parents had had that led to some trauma for them and some very difficult experiences growing up. And I think that that exploration of her desire as a child to break away from her parents and adapt to life in the US and move forward, while also finding that she's constantly pulled back and connected to her home life, her home culture, was a really interesting exploration of that experience as a child of immigrants. And I really, really liked that. Even more than Bui's life, this book really explores in detail her parents' lives. It takes a look at their childhoods through adulthoods to understand what their experiences were and how that shaped them, especially shaped them as parents. And I really loved the way that Bui explored their experiences in Vietnam and how that led to some of the trauma that then they passed on to their children. It took a look at Bui's father, who grew up in very difficult circumstances with a lot of poverty, a lot of insecurity, a lot of danger, and her mother, who grew up in much more elite circumstances with sort of a French colonial view. So it took a look at how both of these experiences shaped their parents and how their young adulthoods, with so much turmoil in Vietnam and losing so many family members to violence and to illness and to so many things, really shaped them, as well as just their experiences as refugees, having to give up everything that they had known, come to a new place where they had to start life over from scratch. How all of that led to the way that her parents had an outlook on life and to the way that they dealt with problems, not always in the healthiest ways. So I really love that exploration of her parents' histories. In addition to the history of Bui's parents being explored, I think that the book did a great job of looking at the history of Vietnam itself, especially as relates to what was going on in the 50s, 60s, 70s, related to the Vietnam War and just all of the political unrest. I think it also gave just a really good understanding of how Vietnamese culture was influenced by French colonialism and how that created such rifts in society, sort of between the haves and the have-nots, and how that led to so much internal turmoil and struggle that was then just exacerbated by the war. I really just liked that way that it presented the context that her parents grew up in and all of that understanding of history and politics to make sense of what happened to them as refugees. And the last and probably most important part of this book that I think made it really special was its exploration of generational trauma. In this book, Bui is really trying to process and understand so much of what happened to her parents and how that influenced the way that she grew up. She dealt with a lot of problems in her home life where her mother was often cold, detached, and absent, and her father was often neglectful and abusive. And she's trying as an adult to deal with the trauma that they have passed down onto her and move past that so that she doesn't continue the cycle and pass that on to her own children. I think that this book, through exploring their oral histories, has given Bui a lot of understanding and compassion for all of the difficult circumstances that led them to develop that kind of trauma that they weren't able to let go of and passed on to her. I think that there are especially some really, really powerful quotes in this book that I want to share because I found them so moving and so insightful into that understanding of her parents' own trauma. So the first is, "Afraid of my father, craving safety and comfort, I had no idea that the terror I felt was only the long shadow of his own." And so she's seeming to come to terms with the idea that the difficulties that she had with her father and the terror of him, the abuse that he had on their family, was something that was really just an echo of the abuse that he had suffered and of the trauma that he had suffered that he was unable to get over, and so therefore passed on to them. Another one, "They taught us to be respectful, to take care of one another, and to do well in school. Those were the intended lessons. The unintentional ones came from their unexercised demons and from the habits they formed over so many years of trying to survive." And I think this is really, really powerful because it looks at how the coping mechanisms that people who go through extremely traumatic events have are something that enables them to survive those bad experiences, but are something that are maladapted to regular life. Even so, they can't necessarily let go of them, they can't necessarily move past them, and so that's something that really does affect generational trauma. And I think that here Bui is starting to understand that this is just something that is, in a sense, a repercussion of all of the political unrest and all of the uncertainty and all of the difficult times that her parents went through and managed to get through. They survived that, but that survival had a cost. And one last quote, "But maybe being their child simply means that I will always feel the weight of their past." And that is such a beautiful statement that acknowledges how heavy generational trauma is and how, in a sense, unavoidable it is for many, many people, and how when your parents have gone through a trauma, often you're going to feel the effects of that. I just really, really liked the way that this book seemed to be her method of processing that trauma, understanding it, and moving past it. So I found it absolutely beautiful. So those are some of the aspects of this book that really stood out to me, that were so powerful, so moving, and just so meaningful. I think that if you have any interest in graphic memoirs or in history or in immigrants and refugees, this book is something that you really should pick up. I think especially given how many refugee crises we have going on in the world at the moment, it really helps understand what's going on for people in that situation and how this is something that's going to affect not just them, but their children as well, and perhaps further generations down. So I think it builds a lot of understanding of that situation and is useful for most people. If you have read this book, please let me know what you thought down in the comments below, or if you've read any other really good books that deal with aspects of immigration or refugees or generational trauma. I'm definitely interested in the topic, so I'd love to hear your recommendations.